Lawmakers inch closer to voting on Trump's sweeping domestic policy bill, also known as the Big Beautiful Bill. And after a marathon 15 hours of Senate clerks reading the entire 940-page bill, the formal floor debate started a short time ago. Welcome back, everyone. Jury deliberations in the criminal sex trafficking trial of Shawn Combs are set to get underway tomorrow. In closing arguments, the defense said the prosecution exaggerated its case against Combs and didn't show evidence of criminal enterprise. Meanwhile, the prosecution argued the defense team was victim blaming. Combs has pleaded not guilty to charges including sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy. He could face up to life in prison if convicted. I want to bring in criminal defense attorney David Oscar Marcus, who joins me now. So just from an analytical standpoint, how do you feel the prosecution and defense did in laying out their evidence? I mean, do you think there are any key pieces of evidence or testimony that will be especially crucial to the jury as they once they get into deliberations?
Sure. Thanks, Omar. So, in a long trial like this, the science shows that jurors make up their minds really early, like after opening statements. So the question is, how important are closings? In a case like this, they're really important because the jury has not heard what the definition of RICO is, how the evidence plays into these charges. So they've heard 7 weeks of testimony, but they really haven't heard, what is RICO? How is this playing into it? So the lawyers got a chance to do that. I will say this. I mean, the jurors after 7 weeks probably wanted much shorter closings to hear all day from the prosecutor on Thursday and all day on Friday from the defense lawyer. I mean, that's tough for any jurors, let alone jurors in this day and age who we call them the TikTok jurors who want really quick snippets of information. It's hard to pay attention for that long. So I'm sure they're ready to get back there and start deliberating.
And I guess, this may be a hard question to ask because it's ultimately up to the jury. But do you think, just as an observer, do you think one side had a stronger case over the other, especially in terms of how they presented it?
Well, it's really interesting. In a lot of ways, it's like two ships passing in the night. The prosecution made Combs out to be a really bad guy and proved that he was a bad guy, a domestic abuser, and so on. The defense, on the other hand, saying, but that's not RICO. And here's why it doesn't satisfy the definition of RICO, of a federal criminal case. So in a lot of ways, they're talking past each other. The prosecution's hoping the jury will focus on how bad a guy that he is. And the defense is focusing on, let's look at the definitions here. Let's be really analytical about what RICO is. I think the defense has a good chance to walk on the top count, on the RICO count. I think it's going to be tough to walk on everything in this case, to be found not guilty of everything. And so, we'll see what the jury does. I will say it's the most excruciating part for a lawyer on either side. I'm a defense lawyer, of course, but when the jury is out, you can't think of a more excruciating part of this long trial. You pace, you pull your hair out, you think of the case you should have done. It's really, really difficult to wait for that verdict.
Yeah, I mean, it's out of your hands at that point. It is in their hands, and that's a stage we will soon be entering. One of the big questions whenever you get a trial like this, where you have a defendant who's very well known, is whether they will actually testify in their own defense. Combs decided not to testify in his own defense this time. But just as a criminal defense attorney, what are those conversations like when you have a defendant who may want to testify, and why do you think in this case, maybe it wasn't the best move for him to do so?
Well, one of the only decisions a defendant gets to make, they can call the shot, is whether to testify. So if they say they're testifying, you can try to talk them out of it, but that's up to them. In this case, the judge asked Combs if he wanted to testify at the end of the day, and he said he was following his lawyer's advice not to. And that was probably the right decision in this case, because they would have been able to go back through the prosecution over all those texts, over all those videos, and it just would have been too much to stand up to all that. So I think the defense made the right call in not putting him on the stand. A lot of this is going to come down to the credibility of the lawyers in their closing argument. It's interesting because both sides had so many lawyers. You usually see one or two lawyers per side. This case had 6, 7, 8 lawyers per side. And so it's hard to build up that trust with a jury over the course of a trial when you're just one of 8 lawyers who's getting to speak.
And, you know, we've been talking about jury deliberations. Obviously, that is a key portion of this. But for those lawyers like yourself, reporters who are watching as well, the judge's instructions to the jury before those deliberations are usually pretty critical. And there's just a lot of times, a lot of fighting over what is included in those definitions, how those definitions are read to the jury. What will those definitions include this time, and why are they so important?
So they're going to be like 80 pages of instructions. It's going to take the judge about an hour to read them to the jury. And it's complicated, especially in a RICO case. You know, of course, in a murder case, like Karen Reed, the question is, did they do it or not? And the defense was Sodi, some other dude did it. In this case, the defense is focused on the definitions of those instructions. And so there was a lot of fighting. The defense had an appellate specialist, a jury instruction specialist, arguing that to the judge to get the instructions tailored in a way that they could make the arguments. And so, you know, it's very critical to have both sides focused on them in their closing argument about the definitions of RICO. And you're likely to see some jury questions because those instructions are confusing. And so when you get those jury questions, don't read too much into them, because we've gotten those jury questions before and it's hard to make heads or tails of what they're asking. You're going to have to wait until the verdict, probably towards the end of the week, I would guess.
The area around the detention center is, as you might imagine, teeming with alligators and invasive Burmese pythons. And the harsh outdoor prison is meant for people detained in President Trump's crackdown on undocumented migrants. Rafael Romo joins us now. So, Rafael, what do we know about this facility and the protests against them?
Yeah, plenty of people who are not happy about this proposal, but it is there and it is actually happening. We couldn't believe it ourselves at first, but it's happening, Omar. And the first detainees are reportedly set to arrive at the facility as early as Tuesday, according to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Florida Attorney General James Othmeyer calls it Alligator Alcatraz, as you mentioned, and says the overall site is 39 square miles and it would hold more than 1,000 people. It's being erected on a little-used airstrip in the Everglades, and it would cost $450 million a year to run, according to a DHS official. The state can request reimbursement for costs from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Florida state officials say the migrant detention facility will be, in their words, efficient and low cost because Mother Nature will provide much of the security. That suggests, Omar, that they're counting on alligators and pythons, not to mention the oppressive heat, to deter the migrants who would be held there from trying to escape. And it seems the federal government agrees. Take a look at this. The Department of Homeland Security published an AI photo on X that shows several alligators wearing ice hats outside of what appears to be a jail, a post considered deeply offensive by immigrant rights groups and others. We reached out to DHS and they acknowledged the post is legitimate. A crowd of protesters descended on the site this weekend to say no to the detention facility, arguing that not only it violates the rights of migrants, but also endangers wildlife.
We've sounded the alarm on this because the Everglades is a lifeline for the state of Florida. And we're not just protecting it for ourselves, but for each and every citizen that lives in Florida. And any kind of, impact that is felt in the Everglades is going to be felt by everybody.
And Omar, in spite of these objections, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis last week floated the idea of building another immigration detention center in his state as part of the state's aggressive push to support the federal government's crackdown on illegal immigration. The second proposed site is located at a Florida National Guard training center known as Camp Blanding, about 30 miles southwest of Jacksonville. Omar?
Thank you for bringing us that reporting, Rafael. All AI images included. Really appreciate it. Welcome back, everyone. We are keeping a close eye on Capitol Hill, where right now, as you can see, I believe that's Senator Patty Murray of Washington. Right now, Senate lawmakers are taking part in an hours-long debate as Republicans attempt to pass the president's so-called Big Beautiful Bill. The mega policy bill is facing some hurdles, though. Several Republican lawmakers not satisfied with some of the changes in the bill. But the question is, how do the American people feel about it? That's why we've got our CNN chief data analyst, Harry Enton here to run the numbers. All right, Harry, how do Americans feel about the big, beautiful bill?
Yeah, if we're talking about adjectives, how about they think it's awful, they think it's horrible, and to quote our colleague Charles Barkley, terrible, terrible, terrible. What are we talking about here? Well, let's take a look at the net favorable rating on the big, beautiful bill. I don't just got one poll for you, Omar. I got 5 of them, and the net favorable rating, minus 19 points, Washington Post, minus 20 points, Pew Research Center, Fox, minus 21, Quinnipiac University, minus 26, KFF, minus 29. You don't have to be a mathematical genius to know that when the net favorable rating of your bill is somewhere between minus 19 and minus 29 points, that it is not a positive bill as viewed by the American public. The American public at this particular point hate the big, beautiful bill. As far as they're concerned, it's not a big, beautiful bill. It's a big, bad bill.
I always appreciate when you hold back, Harry.
I know, I
look,
try.
As people have learned more about the bill, I mean, obviously we're still in these stages working out individual pieces, and we'll see where this ends up. But as people have learned about it, has that popularity changed at all once they get more details?
No, Omar. You know, we have Quinnipiac University. They hated it in early June when the net favorable rating was minus 26 points. And look at where we are in late June. It's the same, minus 26 points. The more they learn about this bill, they hate it just as much. I've been going through the historical books and trying to find a piece of legislation that looks more likely than not to pass and seeing if there is one as unpopular as the big, beautiful bill. And the bottom line is, Omar, I can't find one. This one is in the history books, and for all of the wrong reasons as far as the American public is concerned.
So why is this bill so unpopular?
Why is this bill so unpopular? Well, I think Republicans would argue that this bill is supposed to help out the American people and their family. But the American people disagree with that idea. All right, Trump's policies and your family, help or hurt? The big, beautiful bill, just 23% say help. How about 49%? 49% say hurt. Look, that's a 26-point difference in the direction of hurt. Compare that to Trump's first-term agenda, where the plurality said it helped their family at 44% compared to 31% who said hurt. So the American people elected Trump to help them and their families, but they see the big, beautiful bill as one that, on the whole, hurts their families.
All right. Helpful perspective as we work through the individual details of where the Senate negotiations are. I want to shift gears here to New York, Zohran Mamdani specifically, because you and I spoke after he had a really shocking win in many circles in the New York City Democratic mayoral primary this week. But as I understand, are you getting new data on how exactly he did it?
Yeah, we are. We're getting some new data. You know, according to the New York Times, you know, we knew that Mamdani was going to do better among young voters, but we didn't realize what percentage of the electorate and how much more of them would show up. And oh my goodness gracious, there was a surge right through the roof. New York City Democratic primary turnout, age 18 to 24. You go to 2021, it was less than 50,000. Look at where the preliminary numbers right now suggest more than 100,000 voters age 18 to 24 turned out. When that's Mamdani's best group, and they turned out in record numbers, not a big surprise that he did so much better than a lot of the polling data indicated.
And that's always a coveted demographic. The question, though, is can you actually mobilize that group?
And he
it
did.
seems that's exactly what he did. So I guess that leads right into my next question. What should Democrats nationally take away from this Mamdani win here?
What should they take away is that the party leaders, Democrats who say they want to replace their party leaders, look at this, 62% nationally say yes compared to just 24% who say no. That lines up with the idea that Democrats view their own members of Congress, their own leaders in Congress, record low approval rating. Democrats right now are out for blood. They want to take out their party leaders. And you saw that with Andrew Cuomo going, adios amigos, goodbye, see you later in New York this past Tuesday.
And we'll see if we've heard the last of him in this race. It sounds like we might have a little independent showdown when it comes time to for the election later this year. Harry, before you go, there's a photo going around of your recent grocery run. Can we bring that up? You have it. What is, first of all, what is this selection and why do you have so much? What is going on here?
Okay, so the selection is Fanta Orange, A&W Cream Soda Zero Sugar, some IBC Root Beer we have right here in terms of zero sugar, that's diet. And the bottom line is, when you go to the suburbs, Omar, you gotta load up. And when you're on TV, you have a figure that you have to maintain, so you always go in the zero sugar, zero calorie selection. I like things that taste great, but also are slimming on the body.
Look, when it comes to strategy, there's no one who does it like you. I just feel like I have never seen that selection with that much in that mass and that quantity. I guess I should have never counted you out, Harry Anton.
I got over 120 cans of soda this week, and this doesn't even have the 3 12-packs of mug root beer zero sugar that I purchased later on.
Okay, the next time I need a root beer or cream soda, zero sugar, I'm coming to find you. Harry Anton, appreciate it, as always.
See you later, buddy.
See ya. Welcome to the CNN Newsroom, everyone. I'm Omar Jimenez in New York. Jessica Dean has the day off. Happening right now, lawmakers inch closer to voting on Trump's sweeping domestic policy bill, also known as the Big Beautiful Bill. And after a marathon 15 hours of Senate clerks reading the entire 940-page bill, the formal floor debate started a short time ago. We can expect a long night ahead on the Senate floor. It was a long night last night as well, but here's a little bit of how the process is going to go. It could take up to 20 hours to get through the debate portion, with each side having 10 hours of time they can use. Then the Senate would begin its, quote, vote-a-rama, which is another lengthy process where lawmakers are going to propose and vote on a series of amendments. So if you're tuned in now, buckle up. It's going to be a long ride. Joining me now live is CNN senior writer Tammy Luby. And Tammy, thanks for taking the time. Look, many Democrats, a few Republicans are concerned about how the mega bill would leave nearly 12 million more people uninsured. That's according to the latest Congressional Budget Office analysis released today. But what in the bill will cause so many people to lose their health insurance, or at the very least have it threatened?
Well, the CBO came out today and said that nearly 12 million more people will be uninsured in 2034 because of the bill. They haven't broken out exactly why, but looking at their analysis of the House bill, by far it's the Medicaid work requirements. Now, the bill would actually make multiple changes, both to Medicaid and to the Affordable Care Act, but it is the work requirements that would have the biggest impact. The House bill, for instance, in the House bill, it would cause adding the work requirements for the first time in Medicaid's 60-year history would leave about 5 million more people uninsured. And the Senate bill actually goes even further.
Yeah, for families with kids that are 14 and under, as opposed to just kids in general, right?
Right. So the work requirements would apply to able-bodied adults, generally ages 19 to 64. There are exemptions for people, for parents in the Senate bill, for parents of younger children, for people with disabilities, et cetera. But the major difference between the House bill and the Senate bill is that the Senate bill would require parents of older children to work. And this would be a mandate that would be 80 hours a month. And it's not only work, it could be community service, volunteering, it could be going to school, it could be participating in job training.
Mm. And, one of the other things in this bill is that it does make it a lot harder to get approved for and re-enroll in Medicaid. I mean, at the very least, by swamping and more frequent check-ins on work requirements, which could come with paperwork. How difficult of a process is that expected to be for people here?
That is actually one of the main reasons. The paperwork is one of the main reasons why, experts and others, consumer advocates, are so concerned that the work requirements will cause so many people to lose their coverage. Not everyone on Medicaid is working, but many people are. However, some of those people who are working may still have trouble navigating the process of reporting those work requirements, reporting those hours, and fulfilling the mandate. So there's a lot of concerns that people who are working and who should qualify will either not be able to enroll or not be able to renew their coverage. And we know there was a short period of time in 2018 when the Trump administration allowed Arkansas to institute work requirements, and within a few months, 18,000 people lost their Medicaid coverage in the state before the effort was stopped by the courts. And also, Georgia now has a work requirement for certain Medicaid enrollees, and there are many fewer people who have enrolled than the state expected, in large part because people have had trouble satisfying, or not necessarily satisfying in terms of working, but satisfying in terms of the paperwork to show that they could actually gain coverage through Medicaid.
Got it. Another aspect that some senators have concern over is the Senate bill, as it stands now, estimated to add nearly $3.3 trillion to the deficit over a decade versus the $2.4 trillion for the House bill. How did we end up with that different amount, and how significant of an impact actually is this?
Well, I spoke to Mark Goldwine at the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, who is a longtime government watchdog, and he summed it up as saying that the Senate bill has more tax cuts and it has less spending cuts and fewer revenue raisers, which is why there's such a big difference between the House bill and the Senate bill. One of the notable differences is that the Senate bill would have 3 different business tax credits from the business tax breaks from the 2017 Trump tax cuts. It would make them permanent, and that would cause the deficit to increase. That's why the Senate number is larger. But it has a major impact on the country's fiscal health, and will also have an impact on people, because one of the things the CBO looked at in the House bill again is that adding so much to the deficit would cause interest rates to rise. And we all know that people are already suffering with interest rates, particularly trying to get mortgages. So rising interest rates and an increase to the deficit and an increase to the national debt is not the direction that most people want the country to go.
Tammy Luby, always appreciate the time and insight. Thanks for the reporting. All right, joining me now is one of the key liaisons between House and Senate Republicans on this bill, Oklahoma Republican Senator Markwayne Mullen. And Senator, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. Look, Senate Republican leaders cleared the first major hurdle last night, passed that key procedural vote. I know there's still a long way to go here before making it to President Trump's desk, in theory, by July 4th. But based on where you are in the process right now, do you see that timeline as realistic?
Oh, absolutely. We will, I know you mentioned earlier in your show that we have 20 hours of debate. It won't be full 20 hours. The Democrats will take 20 hours. We'll probably take 2. That means we'll start the bill anywhere between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning, Monday, this coming morning. And then we'll just stay on it. Vote-a-rama is a no holds bar amendment process, meaning that you can put as many amendments on, but you can't ever quit voting. You got to continue moving. And when everybody wears down, then vote-a-rama stops. So I feel like we'll probably go through Monday evening, maybe into Monday night. Then we'll give do the final passage on one big beautiful bill, send it to the House, and they'll probably vote on it maybe Wednesday or Thursday, and be at the president's desk by Friday, July 4th.
If only it was that simple. We'll watch for that. We'll watch for that timeline.
It sounds that simple, but there's a lot of there's a lot of work to do between that.
Yeah.
But we've been working like this since September because we knew we were going to win the election. And in November, we got a mandate by the American people. They wanted a different government. They wanted a different direction than what the Biden administration took us, and that's what we're doing. We're delivering for the American people.
And, one of the dynamics we've been watching, Republican Senator Ron Johnson, for example, he's had concerns about how the bill would affect the national deficit. He told reporters yesterday after the vote that he and others on a similar deficit pursuit had worked out a deal on an amendment that would further cut Medicaid, but he wouldn't say whether he would back the final bill if that amendment isn't adopted. So do you have any details on that deal, and where do negotiations stand with some of these lawmakers who are on the fence about backing a final bill depending on their specific amendments, like Johnson?
Yeah, so this is common, right? We have a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and we're good with that. Everybody wants to make this bill better, and we're okay with that because there is no perfect bill that's ever come out of Congress. And this is a very good bill. It definitely moves us in the right direction and gets America back on track and pushes forward that American first agenda. But at the same time, when you have an idea or you have an amendment, you got to get the votes for it. And we got to pass a bill that'll get 51 votes on the Senate floor and get the magic number in the House. You know, we usually say 218, but last time they passed it with 215. So whatever we can do to improve the bill, we'll do it. But at the end of the day, it's all about the votes. It's about counting the votes. So Ron Johnson has worked very hard. He's been very passionate. He's made great improvements already on the bill, and I believe maybe if we can pass this amendment, we can even do a little bit better. You know, and if you talk about what details are on it, we're still looking at that amendment because we have to make sure it passes the Byrd rule. So it's not finalized yet.
And, you know, just to get to the core of Senator Johnson's concerns here, the Congressional Budget Office put out their analysis of the Senate version of the bill today. Their latest estimates that it would add nearly $3.3 trillion to the deficit over a decade. I mean, how do you begin to address some of Senator Johnson's concerns, or even some from your constituents who say, well, hey, I want you to send that number in the opposite direction?
Well, we are sending in the opposite direction. What this reflects is CBO saying that making tax cuts permanent will add to the deficit. But they also said this in 2017. They said that the tax cuts we put in 2018 would cause a $150 billion deficit over 10 years. And what happened by 2019, by the end of 2019, we actually completely reversed that and saw a surplus of $150 billion. They're saying the same thing here. If we make it permanent, not 10 years, but we make it permanent, that's where the biggest part of the deficit spending is. What's interesting to me is that the Democrats are actually complaining about tax cuts that we actually know will add a surplus, because when we invest in our own backyards, it seems like it's spent better and it reinvests rather than when we send it to the black hole up here in Washington, D.C. But if you remember the Build Back Better bill, it didn't do anything with taxes, and it cost $3 trillion, and it's still sitting out there just costing the American taxpayers and has done nothing to improve the economy.
Well, I will say, yeah, Democrats and Republicans have spent alike and contributed to the deficit in different portions. And I will say some of the analyses that have watered down, I guess, the CBO analysis does rely on, I think, the American economy growing at a rate that I think the White House is very optimistic about, GDP growing over 4%, for example. But
right.
Some other analyses have that a little, I mean, I would say much lower, around 1% or so. So I guess, are you...
Omar, remember,
yeah.
too, we're cutting $1.6 trillion in deficits spending. That's the largest cut ever in American history. $1.6 trillion we're cutting in deficits. In deficits, and so that's huge for us. We're moving in the right direction. If we continue down this path, if we continue to see President Trump's economy come back with a roar of a lion, which is what's happening right now, we continue to see the job reports continue to climb the way they are right now. We see the growth in our GDP. Then what we're going to see is in 2.5 years, possibly, we could have a balanced budget for the first time since '96.
Consumer spending a little down as well, but I hear your point on the overall economy. It is in a good place right now as far as where it's moving. I want to ask about the American Hospital Association, because you talked about some of the cuts we're looking at here. Obviously, Medicaid central in this, but the American Hospital Association warning that these cuts to Medicaid could undermine the ability of hospitals across America to provide critical services to everyone. And look, one of Senator Thom Tillis's concerns here was that dynamic. North Carolina, like Oklahoma, has more than 1 in 5 residents on Medicaid or child health insurance programs. And the CBO, I know we're talking about it a lot, estimates the Senate version of the bill here would affect almost 12 million by 2034. I know you've talked about the focus of these cuts, getting rid of the, quote, waste, fraud, and abuse. But how do you ensure these cuts don't undermine access to health care for all Oklahomans, especially those in rural areas?
So I'm very rural. I was raised on a ranch where my kids were raised. Our biggest grocery store is Harps, and it's small, and the best convenience store we have is Casey's, and that's the only stoplight we have in town. And so I appreciate rural hospitals. I understand they're a backbone of our economy, but I also understand what Medicaid was designed for. Medicaid was designed for those in need. We have 35 million people right now that live below the poverty line. However, we have 70 million people roughly signed up for Medicaid. Ever since Obamacare, we've seen Medicaid explode, and we've had a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse take root inside a system that was designed for those that need it the most. I heard a while ago you talking about the work requirement. Okay, so what the work requirement does is it requires an able-bodied individual with no dependents and no sickness to work, volunteer, or go to school 20 hours a week. And then the paperwork that you guys were talking about, instead of having to prove your means once a year, it says you got to prove it every 6 months.
6 months.
Now,
yeah.
I'm sorry, but that is not a burden. That is just lazy if you're not willing to do that. And if you're not willing to work 20 hours a week or volunteer 20 hours a week or go to school 20 hours a week to try to better yourself, why is it up to the American taxpayer to pay for you not willing to help yourself? Medicaid was designed to help those in need when they needed it the most. And that's what we're trying to preserve Medicaid for. We're trying to make sure it's there for those in need.
I will say part of Senator Josh Hawley's concern, and he cited a woman who wrote to him. She explained that her husband works as a carpenter. Their private insurance covers her, 4 of her kids, but her 5th kid has a brain condition that is under Medicaid at this point. And to her, she's worried that she'll be one of the people that slips through the cracks. I hope you're right. I hope she is not one of those folks, but there is real concern about that. Before we go, because I know you got to go, I want to ask about your colleague, Senator Thom Tillis's decision to not run for re-election. Obviously, he was one of the Republican nays last night. And look, as soon as that happened, President Trump was quick on social media, threatening to primary him. And my question to you is just from where I sit, does it concern you that the dynamic seems to be do what the president says, or he's going to threaten you with the primary?
No, there's a whole lot more to that story, which we don't have time to get in there. But
I got time. I don't know.
I don't have time though.
Okay.
Because,
all right.
But I'll just tell you, there's a lot more behind the scenes that you're not seeing there. However, Thom Tillis is a guy that served North Carolina well. I consider him a friend. We may not agree on every issue, but that's why I get along with those on both sides of the aisle too. We don't have to agree to necessarily be friends, because sometimes you can agree to disagree. However, the decision for him not to run was solely his decision. If he wanted to take on North Carolina and in the decision to not support the one big beautiful bill, which I believe North Carolina supported President Trump overwhelmingly all 3 times, that probably would have been a tough road to haul. But however, if he chose to run, I would commend him for it, but he chose not to. And that doesn't reflect President Trump's threatening. That just reflects a whole lot more information that's not being out in the public.
All right, Senator, I'm going to have to take your word for it on that front, but if you get time for that story, give us a call.
Yeah.
Senator Mark Mullen, appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.